Welcome to the Fantasy Grill. I'm Anthony K. Check it out. This week is our first week. We're going to talk a little bit NBA fantasy as well, but we're going to kick it off with what we always do, which is the NFL. So let's start with it's Return of the Back. If I could sing, I would sing you that Return of the Back song. Return of the Back. Okay, I'm a terrible singer. Don't tune out. Just listen. So our top 5 NFL fantasy players from last week. It's Return of the Back, as I mentioned 5 times already. Austin Eckler coming in at number 1. He is back. If you've seen him over the last 4 weeks, people were questioning his first round status, if you can believe that, after his first 2 weeks. But we've seen what he can do in that Chargers offense. Even as the Chargers have struggled in terms of fantasy, Austin Eckler is the man. Coming in at number 2, Josh Jacobs. I told you. I said, listen, the Raiders have so many weapons on the outside now I know Waller's been hurt, but with Devontae Adams, with Waller, with Hunter Renfrew, it's going to open up running lanes for Josh Jacobs. Just give him some time. He got that time that he needed. He was number 2. Number 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to group them together because let's be honest. The Bengals offense came to play last week, specifically in fantasy. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd. Those were your 1, 2, 3 top fantasy scorers. Sorry, 3, 4, 5 top fantasy scorers last week. If you stacked Joe Burrow and either Tyler Boyd or Jamar Chase, or heck, if you went crazy and threw Tyler Boyd in at your flex, you had a week. I'm going to give honorable mention because a couple of weeks ago I told you, pick up Kenneth Walker if you haven't already. For those that drafted him, keep him stashed. It's going to be his time coming soon. He was the 6th highest fantasy scorer last week. Kenneth Walker is getting it done. He is the main back there in Seattle. Seattle doing better than most people expected this season. So, hey, keep him if you got him. I don't think he's available in any leagues, but hey, take a look. You never know. All right. We're going to do some start sits, and then we're going to jump to the top 5 NBA players this season. Who's available in the NBA if you're doing NBA fantasy. And we're going to play a little game of safe or fraud. I'm going to tell you 4 players and let you know if they're safe to keep on your NBA fantasy lineup or if they're going to be frauds. So watch out for them moving forward. But back to the NFL. Start sit. We're going to start at the QB position. Double check the time. As long as the Minnesota Vikings aren't playing in prime time this week against the Cards, which they're not, Kirk Cousins is your start. He's going up against the 6th worst defense in the Cardinals when it comes to quarterback. They give up 19.5 points per game to the position. They gave up a ton. I know they had some good plays against Andy Dalton last week, but they gave up a ton of points to quarterbacks. Kirk Cousins is going to have a fantasy game this week against the Arizona Cardinals. The one to sit, this one hurts. Did you ever think there would be a time in your life that someone would tell you to start Kirk Cousins and bench Tom Brady? This week is that week versus Baltimore. I know what you're thinking, but Baltimore's defense hasn't been that great. They've been getting better, but Tom Brady has just not been able to get the deep ball. His air yards are down. The biggest thing that I'm finding with Tom Brady, which is stopping him from being as successful as he's been in the past, he only has 2.43 seconds to throw. He's only had 15 plus fantasy points twice this season. It's safe to say Tom Brady is a fantasy sit and maybe a fantasy retiree in the making. All right, to the running back position, Raheem Mostert in Miami has taken over the lead back role for my guy Chase Adams. He's perfect for that offense. He's another speedster between him and Waddle and Tyreek Hill. They've got so much speed on that Dolphins offense going up against the Lions. The Lions have been giving up 29.17 points per game to running backs. Mostert's the one that's going to get the majority of the carries and the receiving yards out of the backfield. Mostert is a definite start. To the mile high, here's where we're going for our running back sit. That's going to be Melvin Gordon. After being benched for no reason, he comes back last week and a dud. This week, they're going up against the Jags. And I know what you're thinking. The Jags are a favorable matchup against running backs. I get it, except Gordon's not going to be that guy. 7 points or fewer in 3 of the last 4 games. Melvin Gordon's a definite sit this week for me, even against that favorable matchup. If you got to play him, you got to play him, but there's better options out there. Wide receiver, man, hot news. If you're depending on when you're seeing this, breaking news literally just broke 5 minutes ago. The Philadelphia Eagles have traded with the Bears for Robert Quinn. I guess the Bears are just they won a game, so they have to trade one of their best defensive players. That makes sense. But Devontae, we're talking about wide receivers, but just wanted to give you that breaking news. Devontae Smith versus Pittsburgh, 15 plus points for Smith in 4 of his last 5 games against a Pittsburgh team that is giving up 43.7 points per game to wide receivers. AJ Brown and Smith are both going to look for them to both have really big games this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. My sit, man, last week was supposed to be, if he was ever going to have a good week, last week was the week for Romeo Doubs. He did not. He gave you a goose egg. This week he's up against the Buffalo Bills, who only give up 30.7 points per game to wide receivers. It looks like Romeo Doubs is out, and you know how Aaron Rodgers can be, so he's a definite sit this week in NFL, if NFL fantasy for your wide receivers. We do have a viewer question, so I did want to pull that up as we go. So here's our fantasy question from Alexander. I've been getting killed this year because I only really have Dalvin Cook as a running back. I have Michael Carter on my bench. Is he worth being my RB2, or is James Robinson going to nullify his impact? For the short term, Carter's a good choice. So this week as your RB2, I think you're good with Carter going in. Remains to be seen what role, obviously, Robinson will have, but they obviously the Jets traded for him for a reason. I think he is going to slide in back at that number 2 position. He will have an opportunity, depending on play, unfortunately, to take over for Michael Carter. This week, I think you're safe. If you can pick up Robinson, definitely go ahead and pick him up. There's some other running backs if you need to look at. Let me know kind of what your team looks like if you do need an analysis at this point, and what league you play in, because I can kind of gauge who's available, who's not available, and give you some running back tips. But yes, I think you're safe for this week. Alexander going with Dalvin Cook and Michael Carter. Obviously, pick up Alexander Madison. He's available in most leagues for those games that Cook misses. He does miss a couple of games a year due to injuries, so you'll want to have him on your roster as well. All right, to the NBA. Let's kick it off with the obvious. The top 5 NBA fantasy players so far this week in terms of points per game, depending on your format. This is on standard format. Giannis Antetokounmpo, number 1. I guess you probably drafted him in that position as well, so that makes sense. Luka Doncic is in at number 2. Nikola Jokic at number 3. My guy, my second favorite player in the NBA next to Giannis, Ja Morant, is the number 4 highest fantasy basketball player this season. And Jason Tatum, I didn't even think to put Jason Tatum into the safe or fraud, but maybe I will. Maybe next week. All right. So let's jump right into who's available this week. So who's been trending high and who's available? These are the 3 best players with a 7 day. So this is what we're going to look at. A 7-day window that have been trending, and who you should pick up for your run this week. Obviously, NBA fantasy a little bit different, or a lot of bit different than the NBA, where although you're playing week-to-week matchups, you're having to make adjustments on a daily basis. But this week, you have a couple of good games. They've all been performing very well over the last 7 days. Lonnie Walker, yes, Lonnie Walker of the Los Angeles Lakers. The team has been terrible. They've all been shooting poorly, but in terms of fantasy and standard leagues, Lonnie Walker's been averaging around 20 points per game over the last 7 days, so he's okay to go with. Isaiah Hartenstein, go look him up. If you need someone as a filler this week, have players missing some games, have some injuries. We've all have some players that are already out and going to miss some time. And the last one, Kelly Olynyk. Kelly is always a good pickup throughout the season. You can add and drop him. People don't tend to keep him on their roster, but he will give you some good quality games like he has over the last 7 days. All right. We're going to end the show with my favorite piece here. It is going to be called Safe or Fraud. I'm going to give you a player, And I'm going to tell you, based on how they've started the season in NBA fantasy, if they're safe or a fraud. Now, that doesn't mean you drop them, obviously, because I've picked some big name players. But you might consider, if you can get quality pieces back, trading them, or just set your level of expectation on what you're going to get from them. So, number one, we're starting with Philadelphia 76ers, James Harden. Safe or fraud? He's safe. He's safe in that offense, the way that they're utilizing him. Even with Joel Embiid, I know that he's had a slow start to the season. He will pick things up. James Harden is safe. He is going to get you your points and what you need in fantasy throughout the season. He looks to be in pretty good shape too. It's kind of reminded me of a Harden a couple of years ago. So Harden is safe. Donovan Mitchell is number 2 on our game of safe or fraud. How do we feel about Donovan Mitchell? Well, listen, he's going to be fantastic all year for the Cavaliers. He puts up a lot of points. He is their offensive catalyst. That's why they brought him in, was to score points. But he's a fraud. He's a fraud. As far as, will he continue to do what he's doing now? And the answer is no. He's going to take a dip. He is still going to be a top 25 fantasy player. Don't get it twisted. But if someone sees Donovan Mitchell and you can find a way to bump up to one of James Harden, the top 5 players that I already mentioned to in a little package deal, sure, take a look. But just curb your enthusiasm with Donovan. That's all I'm saying, is that he is not going to continue this pace throughout the season. Next one up is Pascal Siakam. Oh, that's a good one. I've been hearing a lot of fraud calls, but I'm going to say no. The All-NBAer from last year and probably going to be an All-Star again this year with the surprising Raptors, Pascal Siakam is safe. What you're getting today is what you're going to get from him for the majority of the year. I'm good with Pascal Siakam. The last one. Someone told me that Halliburton is making the Pacers fun to watch again. Maybe so. But is he going to keep this pace up in terms of fantasy? And the answer is fraud. No, he will not. You're going to see a fantasy dip from him as the season progresses. Again, he's one where people are falling in love with watching him play. Take advantage of him. If you can make a trade for a safer player, make that trade when you can early in the season. Now that he's performing as well as he is, I don't think he's going to be able to maintain this much fantasy production. All right. If you have questions, fantasy basketball, fantasy base, fantasy basketball, fantasy football, this is the place. The Fantasy Grill is the place to get it. You can reach me at anthonyk@sportsfluent.com or IG, Twitter, and TikTok. It's sports_fluent. Until next week, now you're more fluent.